Dr. Kevin Folta. He is with the University of Florida. And we want to get to livestock vaccines and some discussion there that's been going on in the news. But first, Dr. Folta, tell us all about you, if you would, please.
Well, that's the boring part. I'm a professor at the University of Florida. I've been here for 20 years. I work mostly in the genomics of fruit crops, which is basically understanding how all of the DNA and genes and things coordinate to give us good traits that can help us make better varieties for farmers. And a big part of what I do is help others learn how to talk to the public about science and train a lot of farmers and scientists and folks who are in industry to be more effective at communicating about agriculture.
Ooh, I like that. I'm okay with good communication. So the whole reason this conversation started is there's a lot of rumor mill out there about mRNA vaccines in livestock. And it started out with a statement that National Cattlemen's Beef Association said we are not doing any in beef. But then a lot of listeners turned around and said, wait, what about pork and chickens? And so could you just give us a little bit, what's an mRNA vaccine? Why are people concerned? What are we doing with them? And I know we have lots of questions.
No, this is fantastic. So I'm really excited about this because as a molecular biologist, mRNA is a central part of what I've studied for 35 years. I've worked with the stuff and I know it inside and out. And I am so excited that these kind of therapeutic and vaccines are being introduced. So mRNA is what they call the middle step of the central dogma of molecular biology. So let me go backwards. You have DNA.
Okay.
Yeah, that's as deep as I'll get. DNA is like the blueprint that's in the center of your cell. It's put away in the nucleus in the library of the cell, and it stays there forever. Think of it like the hard drive on your computer. You don't want to see it. It's put away. It's done. mRNA is kind of like a book in that library. It's one little piece of information that encodes one chunk of information about something, right? And mRNA's information then is very transient. It's very temporary. That book goes away. But in the meantime, it can be used by the cell to create the instructions to make a protein. So proteins are the things that have function and structure in the cell. So DNA in the nucleus, mRNA is this transient copy of one little piece that encodes for the protein. And in the vaccine, the protein is what induces the immunological response in the animal that's been vaccinated. So by providing the mRNA, we're giving the cell a snapshot of what a piece of a virus might look like. And then that teaches the body to respond to that particular virus. So it's a way of having the body prime itself for infection, thinking that it already saw the virus when it never really did. And that's a really nice way to be able to strategically vaccinate livestock and people.
And Kevin, are there any downfalls to the mRNA vaccination? If we, you've got your pluses, you got your what are the minuses in it?
When you look across the board, the pluses are also in the manufacturing. It's much easier to manufacture. It's rapid. You can respond to new variants and new challenges very quickly. So if there's a new variant and a different serotype of a disease, you can manufacture and scale up very quickly. So that's another side of the positives. The downsides are that the delivery of these, we are still learning as we go, right? And you only know when you don't anticipate any plausible challenges. Those have all been worked out since the late 1980s. People have figured out what the downsides are and how to get around them. We saw from the COVID vaccine that there are rare instances of specific things that happen, like myocarditis in young men. There's CVST in women, a type of thrombosis in specific age group in women. There are different epidemiological categories that we can identify where different rare events do occur. But in general, these are extremely safe and look to be a major step forward in the fight against cancer as well as infectious disease.
So you had made a point earlier that these mRNA vaccines that prime the body to be able to build these proteins to fight off the different diseases and whatnot are kind of like a temporary book or a blueprint to that instruction that you were referring to building that protein. How long do these stay in the system of, say, either a person or a cattle? Maybe it's different. How long does the body understand or have the availability to read that book?
Well, let's look at it this way. The book is only administered to a small number of cells. You get the injection in your shoulder. In the animal, you get the same thing in the back in the behind the neck in a pig. It's temporary. This is a very unstable molecule. That's why the COVID vaccines had to be shipped on dry ice and had such limited reach in the developing world, where we had to rely on old school vaccination. This is an extremely unstable molecule. It's injected into the patient. It spreads in those cells, which then produce the protein, and then the RNA goes away. The protein is produced. It elicits the immune response that then protects the animal thereafter, at least as long as the duration of that vaccine works. We saw in COVID, maybe that wasn't as durable as we would have liked to have seen. But for other diseases, and especially in animals, looks extremely promising. For one shot and you're done.
I got to follow up with that, because I had read something. I believe that this got misproved, but this doesn't alter or get absorbed into your DNA, correct? Because I know that there was a big thing during the whole COVID thing with people, and I know we're going to get into cattle about this, but that the DNA was being altered, or it was being added to the DNA, and this was a huge thing or a big deal with the rejection of the whole COVID vaccine. And believe in it, don't believe in it, that's your opinion, what you want to believe. But is that the case? Was that true, or was that misinterpreted?
It was absolutely false. There were some data that came out which we must believe are spurious, because they came through in vitro studies on specific cell types which had alterations which could possibly allow it to happen. In the patient itself, in the animal or the human, it does not happen. We don't possess the enzymes that are required for that to happen. There are cases in the world, viruses do it, other things do it, where you can't actually stick copies of things back into DNA. But this is a one-way trip, and that's what makes it so cool. The RNA is a temporary copy that's translated into protein. That's it. It cannot go backwards in the animal. And if it did, it would just be in those few shoulder muscle where it was injected. And the other side of this too, there's a lot of genetic diseases, things like sickle cell anemia that are just a single base change in DNA, a single letter of DNA changes. If this actually did do that, we could solve sickle cell disease for 100,000 people with a shot in the shoulder. It doesn't work that way.
Before we went to the break, we were kind of teasing on I remember when this whole conversation of the COVID vaccine came out, they were saying, well, we were given this vaccine to cattle back in the 70s or the 80s, and now we're just taking livestock vaccines and shooting them into people. We don't know what's going on with this. What's the misunderstanding or conception on that? Was that true? Are the two things related in any shape or form? Because they were giving, was it SARS, or I think it was SARS.
Might have been.
Some remnant of that to cattle back in 30 years ago or so.
Wow, that doesn't ring a bell. So SARS and MERS were both since the year 2000. And so these are contemporary coronaviruses along with SARS-CoV-2. So I'm unfamiliar with what they're talking about with respect to these vaccines in cattle in the 70s or 80s. That seems a little bit premature.
Okay.
Fair enough. And to reiterate, as we've talked about, there is not an mRNA vaccine that's used in cattle. But what's the difference there with what's going on in poultry and pork production?
Well, nothing in poultry yet either. I wish there was. There's some good opportunities there in poultry for a variety of highly infectious viral transmitted diseases. But in pork, there's a number of diseases that are now currently being treated with mRNA vaccines, that are rotavirus, also a number of digestive disorders, diarrheal diseases of pork, of swine. And there's two companies that are currently making pork-based mRNA vaccines for hogs. That's Merck, and a company up in the Dakotas. Your name just eludes me right now.
Oh, hang on. Would it be MedGene? Because I have some news about them.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it. That's right.
Got it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just slipped my mind under the pressure of being on a microphone. Um, it turns off a funny part of your brain while you're trying to be fluent.
Happens to us
Yeah.
every day.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So, but it's still a very limited application. And the sad part is, if you look at the number of things that it could work against, whether it's rabies or foot and mouth disease, there's avian influenza, there's a variety of diseases that are viral that are in farmed fish that will benefit tremendously from this technology. So for me, it's about protecting farmers and giving farmers the tools to protect their livestock. And I think there's so many good things that can come from this technology.
So as you brought up MedGene, this is a Brookings, South Dakota company, and they are looking at a flu vaccine for turkeys that can help protect against the avian flu strains, in which we talk about up here a lot. We're next door to Minnesota as #1 poultry producer in the U.S., and so this is impactful for all of us. And MedGene's vaccine platform has approval from USDA and is used to make vaccines for swine. So that is one positive for our neighborhood.
So here's a question for you, Bridgette, and also you, Kevin. You might have an answer to this as well. Is there not already a vaccine for bird flu? Because I thought that there was some form of vaccine, and I don't know if that was mRNA or not. And if my memory is correct on that, they were choosing not to use it.
That is a Kevin question. I think he's got probably more up-to-date information than I do. I'll make my opinion, but he's got the answers, I think.
Well, I'm unfamiliar of an avian influenza vaccine. And the problem with that is that the avian influenza vaccine undergoes what's called genome shuffling. It changes very rapidly in response to its continued evolution. So mRNA vaccines are good because they're much more adaptable versus the old school vaccine where you would have different combinations like they do for human influenza. There was a genetically engineered bird that could not spread the disease. So it could catch it, but it couldn't spread it. Okay. And that was developed in 2011 in the country that Scotland, and it's been shelved and never reached production, unfortunately.
So there's been ongoing research for quite some time, because I wanted to ask, how long have we been working with or talking about mRNA vaccines? And I think most folks think this is relatively new, but the way you talk, Kevin, this is not just started in the last 2 years.
No, there was a cool paper back in the 1980s that showed this, and it was very exciting to see that you could inject mRNA into an organism and have it produce the protein. And that was a big step forward. But there are all kinds of funny barriers that happen from immunological or chemical reasons that it just wasn't feasible until 2005. And that's when they figured out how to make this a safe and useful technology that didn't have secondary effects in most organisms that it would be used in. And since 2005, there's been an explosion of development occurring in this space, really since 2013. And there have been a variety of vaccines against human diseases like Zika, chikungunya, all these diseases, dengue, that are kind of minor in the background diseases where you can't scale up normal vaccine production. And you'll see a lot more of this going forward.
And Kevin, how do you fight all the misinformation that's been going on over the last 2-3 years, especially 2 years, over this vaccination? You've got to fight through social media and just false information. And how do you retaliate it or educate people that this isn't true?
Yeah, the problem is that it's impossible. It's very difficult to educate people. And as an educator and as a professor, it kind of makes my heart a little bit sad, because I'm excited by new data and I'm also excited to learn that I'm wrong. But in the social media environment, you find out people don't like hearing that their cherished beliefs are not true. And they dig in even harder when you tell them, or confront them with good information. And so the only way to fight it is to really talk about what's important to us and why we care. To me, it's all about animal welfare. It's about farmers being profitable. It's about consumers having affordable meat and dairy and egg costs. And for me, those are the most important things. And when I tell people that, they sometimes will say, okay, so maybe this is something that I should be interested in. And that you'll never change someone's mind, but you can help them change their own mind. And sharing our values is really the first step.
That's huge. And And honestly, I think one of the benefits that I want to hear you talk about is that early on you said this can be of efficiency and economic benefit to livestock producers. How so? Because that contributes to what we buy in the grocery store as consumers. So if this is beneficial for the livestock producers, how and why does it affect me when I'm buying my proteins?
Sure. Well, look at African swine fever virus, which we haven't had here in the States, but caused 50% of the swine herd to be lost in China last year. You can only imagine what would happen if such a virus were to be found here on shores here. And so this kind of vaccine strategy allows us to be much more agile at responding to new threats. And instead of having to come up with giant fermenters of viruses to purify and then scale up and come away with the pieces of viruses to inject into animals, you just put in this little mRNA, which can be manufactured overnight. It just makes the process of responding to disease threats much more agile. And that ultimately results in better products for animal welfare and better profits for farmers.
I got a couple questions for you here, Kevin. What would you say has been or is one of the most misunderstood or misinterpreted things about mRNA?
Yeah, I think it is that it could be incorporated back into DNA. That's the one big one. The other thought is that it's persistent. mRNA, I swear at the damn stuff because, we have to use it in ice buckets with super clean baked glassware, everything treated, rubber gloves, and not breathing on your samples. I mean, mRNA falls apart if you look at it funny. So when we treat it in the laboratory, it's very difficult to work with. And I've done it for 35 years. And it's something that I'm very, very comfortable with. So the other thought is that it was persistent. The persistence and then moving into DNA are probably the two biggest myths.
I see. And we've talked about this on our show a good handful of times, and we've had a few guests that have talked about it. And this is the whole hoof and mouth disease, and that there is a vaccine for this disease, but they don't distribute it right now unless there was an epidemic. If it were to outbreak within the United States, they would disperse these vaccines. Do you know any information about that? Is it mRNA or any insight or knowledge on that vaccine for hoof and mouth? Say it did go on a rampage in the United States?
Yeah, so right now my belief is that my understanding is that it is a traditional vaccine, but there are multiple serotypes of this disease. It's one of these types of viruses that can shuffle quickly and change rapidly. So if you were to use a vaccine on a regular basis, a impending infection may be able to work its way around it. And so I think it's one of these issues where the mRNA vaccine offers great agility, where until there's a disease outbreak and some sort of clear incidence of the disease, it doesn't, it's not wise to play your cards. So I think we're standing by waiting for outbreak where mRNA vaccine can be deployed very quickly.
I see. You guys got any other questions off your head for Dr. Kevin?
And I just want to back up what you were talking about with the foot and mouth disease. That's a vaccine bank that is being built, but you're right. We haven't had any outbreaks in the U.S. And a reminder to those of you who are coming back from your vacations, thank you for listening to us while you're gone, but don't bring back anything that APHIS, the Ag Inspection Services, don't have on you. And make sure if you've been in hog facilities, et cetera. That's why we want you to wash your shoes and your clothing, because you can literally bring those things back and cause an epidemic outbreak in the U.S.
Yeah, we won't want that at all.
No.
So we got about a couple minutes here, Dr. Kevin Folta. Is there anything that you would like to mention or bring up that we haven't talked about yet that you would like to bring out to the public?
Well, I think the importance of this new technology is that it is extremely agile. And I think you'll see this used in human medicine in many ways going forward. There are companies currently with therapeutics for prostate cancer, which are really advanced, that are mRNA-based therapies. There are therapies which will remove scar tissue from damaged organs like hearts, livers, and kidneys. Those are being developed, and the results in mice and things look fantastic. And this is all just using mRNA to reprogram immune cells to search for a new target. And so you can actually use mRNA to teach a immune cell to attack a specific flavor of cancer cell. It won't work with all cancers. Cancer is a very complicated disease, but there are some very specific ones where it looks good. I think when we malign the technology and we have people in social media saying this is dangerous, it only will slow the development and the deployment of these useful therapies, which could save human lives too. So let's help our animals. Let's help our people.
So I have one point to give back to Dr. Folta, and that is, I heard him do a podcast recently with a mutual friend of ours, Rob Sharkey, with Shark Farmer Podcast.
Right.
And he said his youngest child will have a life expectancy of 100 years. And that's due to the things like Kevin just described to us, how
That's
that can
awesome.
impact us. So think about that. Your new baby right over there, Justin, he could live to be 100.
That's awesome.
So, yes.
Hey, Kevin, say someone's out there, they're listening. They've been listening to this conversation we've been having all about the biology and how these vaccines work, and maybe it piqued someone's curiosity or their interest, or maybe it's something they want to look into more. If maybe that's a career field that they want to go in, kind of follow in your footprints. Where could they go to get a little bit more information on that, or maybe one of your university pages that kind of talk about your program?
Well, I would love to talk more about. I wish I had some good examples. The best thing you could do is go to the Merck website and learn about the animal vaccines there. There's some excellent review papers that are available in places like PubMed and Google Scholar. If you go in and put mRNA vaccine livestock, there's an excellent review paper in there that breaks it down very well by Lee et al., L-E, and other associated authors. That's a really good first place to start.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you very much for coming on the show. This has been awesome. It's been